Racist riots that erupted across the United Kingdom in the first half of August were ostensibly aimed at Muslims, immigrants and the police. But for many Black Britons, it also reignited memories of racist violence by the far right during the second half of the 20th century.
Are we in 2024 or 1974?
That's Ngozi Fulani, the CEO and founder of Sister Space, an African and Caribbean heritage charity in East London. The organisation boarded up its windows as supporters warned them that far-right rioters were headed that way. The riots were fuelled by misinformation spread online that the suspect in a deadly knife attack was an Islamist migrant. Videos also circulated online of white men attacking people of colour across the country. That includes a group badly beating a black man in Manchester.
Hello and welcome to another episode of ERG Powertalk. I'm your host, Joe Santana. That clip you just reviewed is from a Reuters news stream capturing some of the anti-immigrant marches and riots in the UK. Listening to the reporter talk about what's happening and what's driving this behavior sounds eerily like the type of news you often see these days in the United States. So it seems that, like the USA, the UK's got some interesting challenges facing their DEI and community networks, from backlashes and possibly shifting priorities. So how are UK community networks, often called staff networks, coping with this? And what might we learn from their strategies? Those questions and more are the focus of our discussion today. And to help us answer them, we've got the perfect guest. But before we introduce our guest, let's take a moment to review our mission and acknowledge our supporters. This is ERG Power Talk, and I'm your host, Joe Santana. The purpose of ERG Power Talk is to provide a virtual forum for the exchange of great ideas and inspiration for ERG leaders as well as others interested in supporting ERGs. With ERG Power Talk, there is no more waiting until the next conference and praying that you get the budget to travel to the conference to find great ideas and stimulation toward action. Just subscribe and listen at your convenience. Before we begin, a quick note of thanks to our supporters: Atrium Health, Freighted Health and Wisconsin Medical College, Hiscox, Lee Health, National Audubon Society, Tapestry, Oshkosh Corporation, UL Solutions, and Sony Pictures Entertainment. Now, let's go straight to the program. She is a passionate advocate for staff networks and has been instrumental in elevating their role in the workplace. After leaving the civil service in 2012, she launched a groundbreaking book, The Incredible Power of Staff Networks, that provides essential tools for building effective networks. In 2017, she founded the National Day for Staff Networks, a global recognition of the value these communities drive. As a consultant and coach, she equips networks with strategies for success, while her leadership roles include a non-executive directorship at Homerton University Hospital.
Hi, I'm Cherron Inko-Tariah, and I am the CEO of the Power of Staff Networks and the founder of the National Day for Staff Networks, an annual celebration that takes place every May.
Thank you for joining us today on ERG Power Talk. As we were saying before we started recording, it's been quite a while since you and I have met and have had some discussions, and it sounds like you keep raising the bar on your efforts, which is a great thing. So I'm just going to jump into our first question here. In your experience, what are the most critical challenges that are faced by staff networks, or as they're called in the United States, ERGs or BRGs? What are some of the most critical challenges they're facing today in that arena where you're operating in the UK and Europe?
Yeah, great question. I mean, there's always been challenges, but as we saw in the clip, for the first time, they have been they are more overt than they ever have been. The challenge we have in the UK is a lot of the problems around discrimination are quite covert, quite subtle, but the riots that we saw made them very overt and very scary indeed, to be honest with you. But back to staff networks in the UK, the common problem that people have around networks is time. They're never given enough time. And there's a little bit of a mixed message that's sometimes communicated in UK organizations. On the one hand, they say they value networks, they see their value, they appreciate what they bring to staff and so on, but then they don't give them the resources that they need in order to do that effectively or as best as they could. So there's that aspect. In the network themselves, sometimes there's a misunderstanding of the role of the network or the role of the leader of the network. That's not ever given sufficient investment, I don't think. So I spend a lot of time explaining to leaders, this is your role. This is how you lead. This is how you lead a network. And, it's like a leadership role in any other sense. And I guess it's really getting people to understand the value that networks can bring, not just in the D&I arena, but more broadly, commercially, delivering better services and so on. So those are just some of the challenges that people are facing. I think organizations have a high expectation of what they expect networks to deliver without really appreciating that you've not invested in them, you haven't given them any resources or training or time. So it's, sometimes it can feel that you're in a bit of a rocker, in between a rock and a hard place.
Yeah. Again, as I listen to you talk about all this, that sounds a lot like what happens here in the United States. So either the American and the British cousins are very closely aligned in their thinking, or it's something in the nature of how these networks are set up and the expectations that people have of them versus what they invest in them. So in light of all of this, how is it that these staff networks maintain member engagement, especially in an environment where the employees are getting mixed messages, their workload is increasing, and they've got a lot of time pressure. And at the same time, people are saying, this is really important. And, these networks are really good. But on the other end, they're saying, well, you got all this work to do back here instead of spending your time over there. They're getting pulled in different directions. And again, that's common to the US as it is to the UK. So what do staff network members do or the leaders of these networks do to keep everybody engaged in light of this turmoil and this sort of confusion that exists often around staff networks or ERGs?
Yeah, it's a perennial challenge, isn't it? I mean, for me, when it comes to networks, and you'll hear me mention this word purpose several times throughout this interview, because if you're not clear about your purpose, you're going to lose your way. Your purpose is your compass. So you always be clear about your purpose and how does it help members as well as the organization. So there's something about networks being clear about their why, and all the activities they do should be geared towards helping them achieve their why. Rather than this reactionary, recycling door of doing events because we've always done those events. Let's be meaningful about what we're doing and why we're doing it. And I think when members can see that this is a trusted source that I can go to and get some development and learn new skills, when they can see the benefits of the network, then they will want to engage. They will make time. And when there's a lack of engagement, I'm not saying it's always the network's fault, but I say to the networks, look at your shop window. When people look at your network, what is it they're looking at in the shop? What do you have advertised in the shop window that will attract people to get more involved? Are you clear about why what you do is important? Are you clear how it benefits them, how it can benefit their career? So I think networks need to really understand their lane. They're a small slice in a very big pie, but they're an important slice of that pie. And it's really important that they understand this is who we are, this is why we're doing it. Here's what's in it for you. This isn't a cruise ship, it's a working boat. We all need to get involved. And here's what we're expecting from our members. When networks are doing that and they're clear and they're strategic, I find engagement improves. It does improve, along with, getting people involved and so on. So that's what I spend a lot of time talking to networks about.
That makes a lot of sense. I think that a lot of times when these networks are set up through no fault of their own, they're primarily set up to give the company a nice image. So they're told, go out and celebrate and do this and do that. And they get so engaged in doing that they never stop to ask, why am I doing? What is the end game, or what is it that I'm trying to achieve? And you're not the first, and I'm sure you're not going to be the last person that I talk to that says that one of the most important things is for these networks to stop and say, hey, what is it that we're trying to achieve here? What is our vision, or what is our end overall goal that drives everything that we do, as opposed to just doing all this activity in order to have a lot of activity to show that we're doing. So really important stuff. You mentioned before when you were talking about networks and their value, not only as a workplace and workforce asset, but also the commercial value that they can drive. What are some of the strategies that you found most effective in demonstrating that tangible business value that these networks have, so that leaders and other stakeholders can see that this is more than just window dressing to make the company look pretty or look benevolent and nice, but that actually this has economic impact as well as the social impact that it has that's favorable to their employee workforce?
Yeah, of course. I mean, in many organizations, well, in a lot of organizations, it's about pounds and pence, or dollars and cents in your case. But not all organizations are driven by that financial bottom line in the same way as a bank would be, or so it's looking at what is the bottom line. How do networks contribute to the bottom line? And that could be better patient care, it could be better services delivered, more connection with the client services, or whatever the case may be. So I just want to put that out there. So when a network understands the bottom line, it can then think about, well, how does what we do help contribute to that bottom line? And that's the hook right there. That's your hook, because those are the type of things that is keeping the CEO and the senior leadership team awake at night, when they're thinking, well, are we doing the best we could? What are our competitors doing? If you can come in and say, hey, if we're going to sound the alarm on this, so we are a smoke alarm. Networks are a smoke alarm that can say, if you go down this road, it's going to lead to reputational damage. It could cause us some profit leaks. We need to think differently how we're going to serve customers, serve patients, whatever, in a better way. So it's about really getting them to understand, okay, we may not be able to make money, we may not be able to make a product, but we can save you some money, or we can create a service that's going to make it easier for patients or whoever to access. Those type of things, that's what's missing for me in a lot of organizations, when it's not always about the cash, but how do you show that you are contributing to the bottom line? And how do you measure that? That's what we need networks to be able to do, because then we're punching differently. We're punching at a different level when we start to encroach on that territory, right? We're no longer about D&I, soft and fluffy, flag and food, but we're more about, pounds and pence and bottom line. And, that's a whole different dialogue that we're going to enter into. So I think when networks understand that and operate in their lane and show how they are really making moves towards helping the organization look good, be more strategic, more effective, that's what I think people will start to look at them differently. And that is happening. It does happen. There's some phenomenal case studies out there that, I'm sure you and I could speak about, but we need to see more of that. We need to see more of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I've seen that. As you were talking about it, I have seen it. I know a health and hospital organization that does exactly what you were just talking about. They leverage their networks to be able to serve the community of patients in that particular area. And those networks are so critical that the CEO actually meets with them on a regular basis to get feedback. And I actually had the pleasure of interviewing that CEO one time. And she said to me, when a network provides business impacting vital value, it's going to get business impacting vital value attention.
That's right.
When what it does, it's nice stuff that certainly is not unimportant, but it's not really critical to the core mission. It's going to get less attention. It's going to get less focus. It's going to get focus that's appropriate for whatever value it's driving. And in the commercial space, organizations that are for profit, I know organizations that can trace millions of dollars in reduction in turnover costs Two, having a network that addresses and helps them to address the reasons why they have unwanted turnover, or people who leave who they'd rather keep. And so that network's value is going straight to the bottom line of that for-profit company. But again, it is a combination of educating the leaders of the network, helping them to develop the skills they need, providing them the guidance and the context, because without context, if they don't understand the mission of the organization and they don't have those other pieces, it's very hard to do any of that. So I would say that when networks underperform, and I'm going to go out on a limb and say something that I think is a little bit radical, but I think you'll agree with, when networks underperform, it's really 10% the fault of the network and probably 90% the fault of the organization. And the ones that perform well in those environments, the ones that perform really well in those environments that are not as supportive, happen to just in that particular point in time have a superstar person who's chairing them, who's able to rise above the lack of support. But when you build networks, it's like when you build an educational system. If you build an educational system where only the super gifted can learn and thrive, it's a failing educational system, because it should work for the average person. It should not require the individual to be so incredibly above average to be able to succeed. So I think that organizations have to take some of that responsibility for the failure of their networks. And instead of looking at the chair of the network, look at themselves and say, what am I not providing that would make that network more successful? And I see you nodding for those who only hear the audio version of the podcast, and you've had the same experience I have. So given the growing political and cultural backlash against DEI initiatives, how do staff networks navigate that while continuing to advocate for underrepresented groups? How do they keep their members engaged, and how do they keep driving forward when now you've got leadership that in some cases is sitting there and considering whether, they should back off a little bit because they're afraid of a boycott, or for whatever other reason, they're tapping the brakes at the same time that they're moving forward? Given all that, how do those staff networks navigate that skepticism and keep going forward?
Yeah, it's a challenge, isn't it? But for me, I'm always a bit, how can I phrase this now? I'm always a little bit anxious when networks pour all their energy and stock as a result of an external episode or an external challenge that's going on, things that's going on outside their organization, but has a direct impact potentially on their members. And let me explain what I mean by that. We saw this with the murder of George Floyd, when there's a huge rise of, networks around race, networks supporting people of color, Black people and people of color. And there was all this focus and attention. And I still think that was a missed opportunity. I really, really do. The same thing with any geopolitical thing that's happening, and we all pour our stock into that, because when it stops being topical, so does the network. And so my at the core of me, I'm like, okay, so there's a backlash, but we're still facing the same challenges we were facing when we started the network. That hasn't changed. We faced resistance when we started it. We face resistance as we do the stuff. We're going to continue to face resistance because that's how society is, right? That's why we need it. So for me, I would say, if you find yourself, well, the CEO or the SLT or whoever's rode back on this, the problem is still there. So what are you going to do? Row back too? No, you're going to have to say, okay, we need to communicate clearly why this is still important to us and people who look like us and our communities. Maybe we need to think differently about how we educate and raise awareness so that people still understand the importance of this. Make sure we have space ourselves to exhale and offload, because that's a lot of emotional burden that we can carry, isn't it? So how do we offload and making sure that we're not carrying all of that? And really speak to our board sponsor and our board champion and say, hey, this is the time, this is when allyship shows up. We need you to be responsible, be accountable, and demonstrate leadership in this area. We need you to lead by example. continue to create a space for members because they're still facing the onslaught of the backlash, aren't they? So we still need to do that. And then this is going to be an unusual thing to do. We need to get better at telling people what we've done, the impact that we are having. We need to get better at communicating that. We're not. The community is notoriously poor. We need to tell everyone this is the value that we are adding to the organization. Without us, your retention rates would be through the roof, in a negative way. And I think it's about continuing to identify ways we can implement and help support more inclusive policies. So it's not that we shouldn't react, but I don't want it to be such a distraction that we feel so weary and tired that we just give up ourselves. I just see that as a distraction. It's hard.
Yeah. But
it's always been hard. It's never been easy. So let's carry on, I would say,
Yeah.
I don't know if that sounds hard-nosed or whatever, but I just think being steered by what's going on around the world is a very dangerous slope to go down, because when it stops being topical, so do you. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's very reactive. It's all about whatever the news cycle takes you. Oh, defend. Oh, we can go forward now. Oh, wait a minute, we have to go back into defense. And that's not a way to run a community or run any kind of effort. And there was something else that you said that I doubled down on, agree totally, which is talk about the value of what you do. Like, and get a good communication course if that's not something you're good at, and learn how to convey the value of what you do. There's an old philosophy that I'd love to debunk totally. And whenever I hear people say this, it sort of like basically just triggers me into action right away. Well, our work will speak for itself. No, it will not. It never does, because your work only has meaning within the context of what you're doing. And people who are involved in other things, especially senior leaders, are not paying attention to the context of all these details and may not have the wherewithal or the attention to totally appreciate the impact of what you did unless you take the time to tell them and to articulate it as clearly as possible. So that whole thing about the modesty and I don't want to brag about myself, my work will speak for itself. No, it will not. I've never seen anybody truly successful whose work spoke for themselves, right? They did the speaking, or they had surrogates do it for them.
Yeah, I find it I find it funny when people say that. And I said, well, then it becomes about you. And this isn't about you. This is about the ERG or the network you're representing. You're just the figurehead. So you have to get over yourself and tell everybody about what the network has done. When Steven Spielberg has a film coming out, he calls it another Spielberg classic of Steve. And even when the credits roll up, he still puts his name at the end of the film, just in case you didn't know it was his film. Networks need to emulate the same approach. Tell everybody what you've done.
That's right.
Tell them what you've done. Tell them again. Remind them that it was you. And we just need to adopt that kind of approach.
Absolutely.
And we're notoriously poor at doing it.
Yeah, 100% with you there. Okay, so here's what I got out of the first half of our discussion with Cherron. 1, ERG leaders should strongly advocate for the resource, time, and training needed to meet their organization's expectations. Highlight the gap if demands from your network aren't matched by adequate support, and push for investments that allow the network to deliver impactful results. Don't have a plan that's bigger than your resources. 2, clearly define and regularly communicate your network's purpose and goals. This clarity helps your members understand the benefits and value of participation, strengthening engagement, even when organizational support is mixed. 3, show how your network's initiatives tie into the company's core objectives, such as improving customer satisfaction, employee retention, lowering costs, or service quality improvements. Connecting to business goals enhances relevance and boosts organizational support. 4, when performance falls short, remember that it may not just be you. Often, The poor performance of ERGs is a reflection of a lack of organizational support rather than network failings. Companies that point to one superstar network under the guidance of a rock star leader should ask themselves why their institutional systems are so lacking that it takes a rock star to get things done. While upping your game as a leader, you should also advocate for better guidance, resources, and accountability from your leadership to strengthen the institutional pillars that foster network success. Remember, organizations don't need rock star accountants or rock star salespeople to make those departments work. So we shouldn't need rock star ERG leaders to make ERGs impactful and productive either. 5, broaden your network's image beyond DEI by showing how it directly contributes to business outcomes. Some networks and healthcare systems have been instrumental in helping the organization to better meet its mission to serve patients. Others in the for-profit sector have helped their companies generate millions of dollars in revenue. Reframing your network as a valuable business partner rather than solely a DEI-focused group increases its credibility and influence within the organization. And finally, 6, in times of pushback, stay focused on your network's mission. Prepare strategies to advocate for your community while managing resistance, balancing your commitments to equity with the overall value you bring to the members and to the organization. In the next half of our discussion with Cherron, we will explore a few strategies for ensuring your efforts address modern-day challenges and opportunities, such as intersectionality of social identities, and how to ensure you don't overwhelm and burn yourself out, but rather have an enjoyable and uplifting ERG leadership experience. All this and more when we come back, but first this. I'll see you on the other side. Are you an ERG group or committee chair struggling to balance your ERG activities with your day job responsibilities? Well, you're not alone. There are hundreds of thousands of passionate ERG leads all around the world that find themselves in the same boat. The only solution found by many is to give up lunch hours and personal time with family and friends. But there is a better way, and that better way is to master the powerful skills that enable you to 1, set realistic and achievable compelling goals and priorities. 2, distribute the workload by effectively delegating tasks and responsibilities to others. 3, communicate in a way that increases your impact with less time and effort on your part. 4, secure the full and active support of executive sponsors and other senior business leaders. And 5, fit your ERG leadership work into a reasonable set of time boundaries. And that and more is exactly what tens of thousands of your colleagues have learned to do effortlessly by participating in Supercharge Workshops. Supercharge Workshops was developed by us along the same easy and powerful how-to framework found in our popular Supercharge Your ERGs book. The modular, customizable programs are loaded with fun exercises and tools that will immediately give you back hours of time each day while increasing your ability to achieve high impact and measurable results in both your ERG work and your job. For more details on how you can schedule a Supercharge Workshop session in your organization, go to superchargeworkshops.com. That's https:// Supercharge Workshops, one word with no spaces.com. So don't suffer silently. Take that first step towards stopping your struggle today. Check out Supercharge Workshops. So here's another question I have for you. I would imagine that in the UK, as in the United States and other places, your world, and as our world, is becoming more intersectional. Today, there are very few people that are pure for anything, that they are purely this or purely that. When I look around, even in my own family and all the intermarriages and the different groups and so forth, it's essentially this hodgepodge of different identities mixed together. Meanwhile, most of our networks tend to be around what I call traditional identities that people have. Let's say in America, they have the African American or the Black network, they have the Asian network, or they have the Veterans network, or the Women's network. And of course, we're not talking about saying, hey, let's go out there and build the Black female veteran network, because with so many different combinations, it's endless how many permutations you could have. You'd end up with hundreds of networks. But nevertheless, we need to find ways to address the needs of a workforce that is becoming increasingly intersectional. So my question is, what are some of the things that you've seen that these networks do in order to evolve to meet those needs of an intersectional workforce, even though they may be the women's network and you may have the other network here, but are they partnering, or what are they doing in order to meet the needs of people that fall at the crossroads of multiple traditional identities?
Yeah, it's a great question. You touched upon it just now, and a lot of when I say to networks, how are you being intersectional? They say things like, oh, well, we collaborated with this network, or we did this in partnership with this network, and that's great. However, if we are really to understand intersectionality in its purest form, it's not about identity, it's more about the inequality that happens at the intersect. So for you to appreciate that, you need to understand the issues that different groups face. A lot of the time, we're just walking in understanding our own, or if we happen to cross, we will know the ones that related to us. But I don't know a lot about neurodiversity, for example, or what it's like to be a Muslim person, for example. But then, do I need to know those things, or do I need to know what inequalities they face when that particular characteristic collides with something else? So I think it's important for them to understand where they meet. They meet at the intersection when there's an inequality. So I'm always about them. Well, how does what you do address the inequality or the disadvantage or the discriminatory practice faced at this point? Because the danger is it's just going to be collaborating with other networks, which is great. But if your outcome is, we want this event, or we want this activity, or we want this policy to diminish, eradicate inequality that impacts on different groups at this point, then you become more laser-like in your focus, I believe. So having the collaborative events is a great start. But if we're going to go really deep into this and really strive to bring some change and unearth some problems, then we need to understand what the challenges are and how we be each other's ally in the moment. Because we all have privilege. We all have privilege at some point, because at some point we're in a majority group, at some point. And it's understanding, how do you extend that in the moment? And the only way you can do that is if you understand the struggle that colleagues are going through. So yes, it's about the nice, soft, touchy event stuff, but it's also about, how do I understand really what you're going through when you face that inequality part of your walk? So for me, I think it's important, but we need to develop our knowledge and fill some of those gaps. We don't know everything simply because we need an ERG or a network. We still got learning to do, and I think for me that's paramount. Others may disagree, but I think if we're going to do this, let's do it properly.
Yeah, we're all experts in our own interactions with the world, our own experiences. We know where we have advantage or privilege, and we know where we have a disadvantage in certain situations. But there was something you said that I think was something that really stuck out to me as being really insightful, and that I want to make sure that we put a couple of underlines and then highlighted in yellow. And that is that when people are at an intersection of various types of these traditional identities, there may be cumulative disadvantages that meet at that point. So, for example, if you happen to be a neurodiverse Black woman You may be facing challenges that are inherently part of your Black identity, layered with challenges that are part of your female identity, which would be different if you were a man, layered with challenges that have to do with being a neurodiverse person, which may not be the same if you were a male or you were of a different category. So focusing on that, as this is what this cross-section group or this committee is going to focus on, I think to your point, it sharpens the value that cross-group committee can drive, because it gives them a stronger picture of what that group needs. And I think that's a really insightful thing, because I think a lot of times when people do talk about intersection, it sounds more like so that we can understand each other and collaborate. But I think that beyond collaborating and just understanding, it's really getting to the nitty-gritty of what are the obstacles faced by this particular intersective point, and what are some of the things that we can do to lift some of those obstacles. So I love that insight. That's why I want to really underline it, make sure that people don't miss that. So what advice would you give to network leaders who are struggling to balance their advocacy for various groups, whether it's their own community or to be a champion for other communities and intersection points and so forth, and at the same time link up with broader organizational objectives? Is there a map that you can provide to make sure that when you put together that big vision or goal, that you make sure that you encompass these various important elements?
Yeah, I mean, firstly, I'm all about, ensuring that network leaders, ERG leaders have a self-care toolkit. Because this is a role like no other, as we know, right? So I'm always about that. And the second thing I want you to be aware of is that you are not the CEO of the organization. You do not need to carry everything on your shoulders. So stop doing that, okay? You can't change the world, but you can try and influence the world of where you work, all right? So I'm going to say the word again. Here we go. Purpose, all right? Do what you can with what you have where you are. Start off with your purpose. What do you want it to achieve? Yes? Align those with some of the goals, the strategic goals of the organization. Yeah, that's your second pit stop. All right? Think about where you want that to be. Then you think, well, okay, what is it we need? How are we going to prioritize then? So you've got these goals. How are you going to prioritize? Just choose 2 or 3 priorities. Don't go overboard because you can't do everything. Choose 2 or 3. Think about effort and impact. Yeah? Then we're thinking about, okay, I've got my priorities. What can I actually deliver? Yeah? Again, think about what that looks like, tangible for the members as well as your organization. How are you going to measure the impact of that delivery? And then you tell everybody what you've done. If we're thinking of a roadmap, those are the key points I think we need to keep at the forefront of our minds as we do things. But we want to do 50 things and we've got no one to help us, and then we're burned out. And then we said, does anybody want to take over the network? We become the worst advert for a network leader they could possibly be, because we're frazzled and tired. So I would suggest just take a step back. Yeah? Take a step back, take a breath, and just plot what you want to do in a very careful, but don't burden yourself. I'm all about keeping it real, keeping it. I want people to enjoy the role. And you can't enjoy the role if you're carrying all this emotional labor and feel that you have to fix everything. It just spoils a fantastic opportunity. So that's what I would suggest, Joe.
Excellent advice. And I love the way you said it's not a great advert, because when you're trying to get a new network leader later on, they look and they go like, oh my God, did you see what it did to that person? I don't want to do that. Right? You have to be insane to take that role on.
Exactly.
So you do need to have that balance. Say, the other question I have for you is, just like in the United States, I'm sure that globally and in the UK, you also face the tightening budgets that happen at various points. So a network may start out and they'll say, hey, you know what, you're going to get X amount of dollars or pounds in order to do X, Y, Z. somewhere halfway down the year, the cost saving specter comes and says, we're going to have to claw back some of that money. What are some of the ways that you advise these groups to continue making meaningful contributions without trying to overextend themselves and do what they planned on doing with X amount of money and resources with half that at the cost of their own health and their own personal time? What are some of the things that you've seen work or that you've advised others to do to address that situation where there's a bit of a clawback and they lose some budget? That seems to be like a common theme that comes up a lot here, and I'm sure it comes up in the UK as well.
Yeah, it certainly does. Well, firstly, depending on where you are in the UK and the sector, budgets have always been tight. So you learn to navigate that very early on in your journey. But what I would say, if you're a network leader listening to this, or an ERG leader, I want you to repeat after me: under promise, over deliver. Just keep saying that: under promise, over deliver. Don't over promise and under deliver. And I'm saying that because just as you explained in that scenario, you could have all of these ambitions and then it goes to pot because the money has been withdrawn. I just choose 2 key things you want to deliver, or maybe 3. Keep 3 in your back pocket, but only announce 2 of those and deliver those to the best of your ability. Yeah. And then keep telling people, this is what we did. This is what people said. Here's some data. And we would do more of it, but we need a bit more money for next year. So you start to build your own evidence. You build your evidence so that when you submit your proposal, they're not going to touch it because they've seen the results that you've gleaned with what you've got. Yeah. Oh, this is what we did. Yeah. But if only we had a couple of £1,000 more, we could do this. So it's about really pacing yourself and thinking about what will have the most impact. And how are we going to show that? Yeah. So carefully choose what you want to focus on. Yeah. Think about who you can collaborate with. You don't always have to do the heavy lifting. Collaborate with somebody else in the organization or another ERG. Yeah. Think about how you can do that, how you can have that joint goal. So I think we just need to be a bit savvy. When money is tight, innovation starts to really get stimulated because we think of ways we can raise some money or get things done without the budget. So I think it's really important to think outside the box. You shouldn't have to, but this is where we are. This is the reality. Yeah. Let's be pragmatic about it. Let's just say, okay, let's do what we're going to do.
Yeah. Absolutely. When you're low on resources, you have to become resourceful, right? And you have to look for ways to get around that limit. And the other thing that's really interesting is prior to entering the DEI space, I was a line exec and I was involved a lot with the sale of services in the IT space. And something that you said now about under promise and over deliver in the sales world, we used to call that sandbagging. We would say, I can bring in 10 million, 20 million. But in reality, we had a book of business of potential clients that we knew could add maybe 30, 40. But if you said you were going to do 40 and they put that down and then you didn't meet it, you failed, right? So a lot of times the VP of sales would turn around and say like, all right, what are you guys keeping in your back pocket, And we would all kind of like chuckle at that. But that's exactly what you're saying is don't put all this stuff out there that you're going to do without taking into account the fact that you might lose some budget or that you may not be able to deliver that because let's face it, these people have full-time jobs. This is not their full-time job is not running a staff network or an ERG. What resources do you think would really be of value to ERG leaders? There are great ideas and solutions to issues that you have in one part of the world and another part of the world. We just don't seem to look outside of our own little backyard. So I'd love for you to talk about what's in your backyard that maybe some of our listeners can go out there and tap into and use to develop and run their groups effectively.
Yeah, great question. I think, one thing I'm really excited about, as you mentioned, I wrote a book in 2015, but there's now a few other books. There's quite a few books out there around running your ERG effectively. So I would say invest in some of those. Joe, you've written a couple at least, about ERGs and so on. So I would say invest in getting some of those resources because we don't do that. We don't do that. We just think, oh, let's invest and read and understand the world within which we are working in. Yeah, the world of ERGs, because it is a big world out there. So I would say, get my book, of course, but get resources and just do a Google and find out what other resources are out there. The second thing that I would say, and I am blowing my own trumpet because I think it's great and we need it. I've always got this fear that the network world will turn into the wild, wild west and everyone will just be doing their own thing. And I'm always fighting against that. So we launched last year something called the Stellar Standard, and it's a benchmark tool purely for staff networks and ERGs. It's not about D&I, it's purely about you to find out where you are, what's your governance like, what's your structure like, what impact are you having? And so that's something that I encourage people to go and have a look at. Stellar Standard, Stellar as in STELLAR standard.co.uk, and just have a look. And if you want to apply to get that external scrutiny to see where you are and get some advice, because you get feedback as well, by all means go for it. And then I would just, even now, if you just Google ERG tools, staff network tools, the stuff that comes up is amazing, because it wasn't there 10 years ago. Trust me, it wasn't there, and it's there now. And I think it's because of things like this platform and your work, Joe, and what I'm doing, and everybody's getting involved. I think it's great. So there's lots of tools out there, but those are the two I would like to really push forward.
And you've also got your staff network day where people can come. And if I recall, there is a virtual component to that. So people that are outside of Europe can also attend virtually. And again, I think that there's just such great ideas that sometimes exist in one context. They exist, let's say, for example, the UK's come up with something, or they're maybe doing something over in some other part of the world, and we can combine these ideas together. That's where great ideas come from. Yeah. So tell us what that staff network date is, when it's coming up, and how people can sign up for it if they want to check it out.
Sure. So the Staff Networks Day is exactly how it says on the tin. It's a day just to celebrate, and really recognize the value that networks bring to the organization. It takes place in the UK on the second Wednesday of May. So next year it's the 14th of May, 2025. And if you go to the website, you can see what we did this year. And then, then over the next few months, we'll be talking about what the theme is and how you can get involved and so on. So if you just put in networksday.co.uk, you will come across our website. But it's a fantastic day. And imagine if every network across the world just stopped and said, yes, and, celebrated, and the organizations applauded you and say thank you. That's what this day is about. So, let's get involved.
So, lastly, how can our listeners reach you personally if they want to ask more questions, learn more about your work, or engage you in some way?
Oh, right. Yeah. So I'm on LinkedIn under my name, Cherron Inko-Tariah. I'm the only one. I'm the only Cherron Inko-Tariah. So, you should be able to find me. By all means, just mention this podcast and I'll happily accept the invitation. I'm no longer on X. I made the decision to step away from that platform, but you can find me on Blue Sky under POS Networks. And I'm also on Instagram and Threads under POSN_CEO. There's a lot there.
You are probably maybe the third person that I've interviewed who has said, I am the only, whatever the name is, in your case, Cherron, on LinkedIn. I wish I could say that about Joe Santana, but there seems to be a plethora of us. Yeah, there's a couple of us out there. But in any event, thank you so much for being on ERG Power Talk. As always, I appreciate chatting with you and your insights.
Thank you so much.
Okay, so here's what I got out of the second segment of our discussion with Cherron. 1, while collaborating with other networks to address intersectional opportunities and challenges is a good start, the focus of these cross-ERG initiatives should be on tackling specific inequalities faced by employees at the intersection of multiple identities. This targeted approach allows cross-network collaboration teams to identify and address unique barriers, thereby driving more impactful change. 2, before launching any effort to address intersectional challenges, these collaborative groups should invest time in understanding the unique struggles of the intersecting identities, not just as abstract concepts, but as lived experiences. By genuinely understanding the inequalities these individuals face, network leaders can become more effective allies and advocates, especially during critical moments. 3, start each initiative by clearly defining its purpose and how it aligns with the broader organizational objectives. This approach enables network leaders to set goals that resonate with the entire organization, fostering both support and a clear sense of direction. 4, avoid overextending yourself. Focus only on 2 or 3 impactful priorities at a time. Aim to deliver on these commitments before introducing new ones, ensuring that resources are used effectively and stakeholders see tangible results, which lead to increased future support. And don't overpromise results. 5, when facing budget cuts, seek creative low-cost solutions and explore partnerships with other teams or networks to share resources. Resource constraints can drive innovation and deepen collaboration, often leading to fresh approaches that may not require substantial funding. But again, don't overextend yourself. Don't try to achieve $20,000 results with $2,000 by sacrificing your health, your family, or your well-being. And finally, 6, leading an ERG can be demanding. Avoid burnout by creating a self-care toolkit, pacing your initiatives, and acknowledging that you're not responsible for solving all the issues by yourself. This more balanced approach prevents exhaustion and promotes a sustainable, fulfilling leadership experience. There is an old African proverb that says, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. This proverb captures the essence of what we've learned so far. ERG leadership thrives on collaboration, sustainable pacing, and a strong support system. While individual contributions matter and someone pushing themselves all out can in the short term appear to produce outsized results, the true long-term power of an ERG comes from collective purpose, alignment with organizational goals, and mutual support. By working together and advocating for what you need, you set yourself and your ERG up for lasting impact. Thank you for tuning in to ERG Power Talk. If you enjoyed and got value out of this program, please like us and leave a favorable review at your podcast provider's site. Also, invite others to listen to the show. By the way, contact me if you're looking for an ERG Symposium keynote or a leader for your strategy workshop, new chair onboarding, and or ERG bootcamp. I can run these for you either in person or in a virtual setting. Also, for more great ideas and tips for your ERGs, get my books, Supercharge Your ERGs, 18 Tips to Power Up Your ERG/BRG Strategy, and the new DEI and ERG Frontier, how you and your efforts can rise and thrive in the new world of constant disruption. Both available on Amazon.com. I'm Joe Santana. Thanks again for tuning in.